everyone. My name is B. Phillips, and I am the Youth Training Coordinator at FTNYS. Today's webinar is titled Strategies for Recruiting Youth Peer Advocates, hosted by FTNYS and CTAC, and presented by Jay Culkin, our Youth Workforce Development Coordinator at FTNYS. We are very excited to have Jay speak to us about the strategies for recruiting youth peer advocates. Thank you so much for joining us, and I will now pass it on to Jay to introduce themselves and get us started.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jay. I use the pronouns he, him. I am a credentialed youth peer advocate, as well as one of the workforce development coordinators here at Families Together in New York State. So we are going to get into strategies for recruitment of youth peer advocates. I do have a second screen on this side of me, so if you do see me looking off, it's just for logistical purposes. So we will get started. Great. So if I can have everybody introduce themselves, just to get to know each other, for us to get to know you. Let us know what your name is, your pronouns, if you'd like to share them, the region that you work. You could say county or just the general area in New York State or outside of New York State. What role you hold at your agency, and what is your favorite thing about the summer, if you'd like to share. Put that in the chat. Right. I see some people had already put that in the chat before we started. So, right. So we'll keep that flowing in the chat. All right. So throughout this presentation, we're going to be going over learning how to build a strong and effective youth peer advocate workforce. If you're here, assumedly you have some role in recruiting youth peer advocates, discussing what qualifies an individual to be credentialed as a youth peer advocate, reviewing the credentialing process for youth peer advocates, and developing that intentional recruitment plan that includes strategic advertising, screening, interviewing, and onboarding. So let's go over a few things that youth peer advocates do and do not do. So on the left side, you'll see these are the things that we do. These are the things that, when youth peer advocates are providing their services, you're going to see that in their notes. You're going to see that in their treatment plans, as things that they communicate verbally that they can do, in their work with the youth. They could be communicating it to you, to other staff. So building skills that support the youth's care in an individual way, empowering and inspiring hope, purposeful sharing, destigmatizing their experiences, both, their own experiences and the youth and all of the youth that they're working with, coaching the youth through taking an active role in their care, and connecting the youth to relevant resources. So there are a lot of ways that youth peer advocates can do that, and youth peer advocates receive continuous training throughout their time as a youth peer advocate so they can learn what activities are and aren't appropriate in that role. So some of the things that youth peer advocates do not do. So these are the roles that you should not be putting the youth peer advocates in at your agency. Care management, they're not trained for that. Some might be, but then they're not in that capacity. They're not in the youth peer advocate capacity. Therapy, regular transportation, babysitting, childcare, direct support, anything like that. This is especially important in a residential facility. It can be a little bit challenging sometimes. The lines can get blurred sometimes between that direct care staff and the youth peer advocate, especially when you have like one youth peer advocate that's working with all of the youth there. Representing the youth in their place, right? We're going to have as much youth voice as possible. So youth peer advocates are trained to take as much of a backseat as they can, in those circumstances where the youth's voice should be heard firsthand. And providing discipline or policing their behavior unless it falls under the category of mandated reporter, something that has to be mandated reporting. And the youth peer advocates typically will actually state what makes them a mandated reporter as they're working with the youth. So they might say to the youth, I just want to let you know before I start working with you, these are some of the boundaries, and one of those boundaries is I have to follow those mandated reporting responsibilities. And, that's if you're hurting yourself, hurting or want to hurt others, or any kind of child abuse is involved, right? So they'll say that right off the bat, and so they'll make it very clear, they're supposed to make it very clear with the youth, what their role is with that. But other than that, outside of that, it's not a youth peer advocate's job to, report, everything that the youth is saying, and, that the youth got into a negative relationship and it's not going well for them. That there's a lot of choice that's being kept within that youth sphere, and there's more of a guiding sort of role that youth peer advocates have. Hmm. All right, so where are youth peer advocates? Where are we looking for youth peer advocates? So some strategies for recruiting peers include community-based events and organizations. You might be part of one of them. Utilizing social media, engaging the formal youth and young adult spaces, or engaging in spaces where youth and young adults might be casually spending time. So they're not really required to be there, they're opting to be there. So a few examples of some community-based organizations and events, right? Are you going to those county or town events such as a county fair? I know personally, I just moved from a pretty suburban area down on Long Island to, a pretty rural small town area up here, and I'm learning how important county fairs are to some of these local areas. So are you going to those big events that are so big in the county, that are big in the town, that are big in the city? Are you at the wellness fairs, the job fairs, resource fairs? There's a lot of agencies that will, have their own sort of like wellness fair that they have in their building and everything like that. Are you going to that? Are you going to those types of things? Was a college, do they have a job fair? Does the Department of Labor have a job fair that you could be a part of? And are you at that informal type of Pride Fest, those like 5K walks that might come with like, breast cancer walks, or suicide foundation walks, sometimes like Take Back the Night types of walks that happen on college campuses, and then holiday parades too. Just any type of, there's like downstate, on Long Island where I came from, there was like a winter fest that would happen at our town hall all the time where we lived. So are you putting up a booth in those events? So social media, that was another one that I had mentioned. So a few things that you could do. Your agency might have, some already established social media accounts. You might need to talk to your communications team to maybe get, if you don't have a TikTok, everybody has a TikTok now that's under a certain age, or they've used TikTok before, or they know somebody. TikToks get reposted onto Instagram and things like that. So figure out what, social media is popular in your area, is popular with the individuals that you'd like to recruit, and see if you can add that if you don't already have it. And make a post calling for applicants and describing the lived experience piece. And describing the lived experience piece is going to take a little bit off your plate when it comes to, individuals that want to work with youth and they have a positive, like they have a good intention, and they don't end up even qualifying for it because they don't have the lived experience. We've had applicants trying to get the credential in the past that maybe have a lot of work experience, but they don't have their own lived experience, and they may misunderstand that. So making your posts and making your advertisements for the job pretty specific might help with sort of, taking away, that extra stuff on your plate, as well as the age requirement. It is 18 to 30, and I'll speak a little bit more about that on a different slide, but just making sure that you're making that prominent in your social media posts. Mention the Youth Peer Advocate credential. Include that it's a statewide credential, a professionally recognized credential, right? Youth peer advocates, this is like for their professional growth. Maybe if they move, I was working with families together when I moved, but, considering I came from Long Island, and I have to move up here, where I am right now, and I got to figure out what agencies are around, but if I know these agencies, they take the Youth Peer Advocate credential, I know that it can go with me wherever I may go, or from agency to agency, even in the same location, in the same geographic region. And then sharing your agency's story as well. And I guess my intention too, as well, to mention story specifically, yes, share the story of your agency, why they're important in the youth, like the peer world and the lived experience world, and also post it on the story, on the Instagram story, on the Facebook story. Take advantage of those like sort of things that people click through. They may not look at all of your posts, but they'll probably, when they see the little ring around your, agency's Instagram account, and they're going to watch the story, and they're going to see that, so just making sure that you post that every once in a while onto the story. And don't just post about the job, post about that continuous commitment to peer inclusion. Like I was saying, just sharing about how your agency factors into that, the commitment to the youth first, youth led sort of model and family driven sort of model. And then again, using things like Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, social media is really growing right now. So you might want to even tap into the youth or youth peer advocates or just younger staff that work in your agencies currently to see where you might be able to best reach youth peer advocates. So now we're going to go into formal settings. So some formal settings that you might find youth peer advocates or people that qualify as youth peer advocates could be universities, a career center, right? I was mentioning job fairs before. Does your local community college or your local four-year university or even trade schools, do they have a career center that you could just post a little flyer up on their board? What about vocational schools? What about Access VR? I have the job coaching agencies toward the bottom, Access VR, giving it to the case managers that are, trying to help the individuals that they serve find a job that works for them and works for their needs. Community centers, local community centers, agencies that serve different populations of young people within your own agency and programs, and then like libraries, formal settings that maybe some college students may be going to get volunteer hours or attend a class or their career center over there at the library, right? One example that I can think of is maybe a recovery center. A lot of places around New York State, are putting together almost like this clubhouse format. We have one right in the town over here, but this clubhouse format for people recovering from substance use issues, and just a way to like kind of distract them and keep them from, relapsing. And they go and they get all those community resources there, employment resource right in there, right? So that will help youth peer advocates, people that are people that are eligible to be youth peer advocates and qualified to be youth peer advocates to get that information for them. Okay. So informal settings. A lot of this is probably going to be posting things on a community board. A lot of cafes and places like that, have community boards where you can put flyers, but also just connecting with maybe the managers that work there or connecting with the staff that work there. Barbershops, beauty supply stores, churches. That's a good one. A lot of faith-based organizations might have connections. They might even be able to direct you to different other informal locations. Quick and affordable food spots, gaming stores, malls, parks and outdoor spaces. So, switch to the next piece. Right. So engagement ideas, interactive peer spaces such as youth peer advocate-led panels, information sessions, or table/booths at resource fairs. Department of Labor does virtual job fairs quite often. So it might be worth it to get your agency into that and to be able to have maybe, like I said, the youth peer advocate led panel as sort of like that optional booth for people to visit as they're going to this job fair. Contacting food pantries, recovery centers, shelters, youth programs, and give flyers, posters with the QR codes for the service recipients, right? Like just something when a youth goes to, a food pantry, maybe just they give out a folder of different flyers and things like that. Just add that flyer right in. A lot of times libraries will have that kind of like, they have these folders that people can take if they're getting any kind of services or resources from that library. You'll hand them that folder and your flyers right in that folder with the QR code. And just making sure that that QR code leads to one of the resources, the job description maybe for your job description for maybe for your agency specifically, or you might want to have another QR code that directs you to Families Together, right where the information for our credentialing is, so that they know how to get to that quickly. And then posting those flyers with the QR codes on community boards, local businesses, and submitting the job posting to be highlighted in newsletters at various resources. Your own newsletter, it might, be highlighted there. The job postings, maybe you could have them highlighted at a library's newsletters. All these community resources that we've been listing, they probably have newsletters that they're sending out to people. People write their email down, Constant Contact, MailChimp, all that. It's going out, and people can see that on those newsletters that they get. Right. And it would be a good strategy to involve current youth peer advocates that you have at your agency. If you already, or even family peer advocates, a little bit, just to kind of get a little bit of their insight, because they are pretty closely related. Families Together also credentials the family peer advocates, but just getting those family and youth staff that you have already involved, offering incentives and referral bonuses, trying to get peer workers in. You might even, honestly, I should have mentioned this as I was kind of going through. It's not related in Families Together, but the peer certification board, New York State certified peer specialists. They work adult to adult. They may know somebody though who qualifies as a youth peer advocate. Sometimes certified peer specialists are young enough and have the lived experience to be able to be youth peer advocates too. So even tapping into the certified peer specialists that you have in your agency, if you have them. Create youth peer advocate feedback and focus groups so that youth peer advocate voices are heard, so that they're even giving, maybe you're watching this webinar right now, but the youth peer advocates might have even more to build on, right? Encouraging youth peer advocates to go to networking events. So getting themselves out there while also, getting other people to understand a little bit more about them and youth peer advocates in general, and even the agency that they're coming from. That sort of symbiotic, reciprocal relationship there. Opportunities for professional and leadership development. Bring them to, do an internship, a mentorship within the agency, sponsor a conference or a professional event attendance. Send them to a conference. There's a bunch of conferences that happen even locally, all over the state, a lot in Albany. You could go even further and go to like more national level. There's a bunch coming up. Actually, I think NAMI just had theirs, so like all these sort of professional development opportunities where people can network and meet, and then youth peer advocates developing and presenting recruitment material. They might be the best people to put together the flyer. So maybe giving them a little bit of their, training time, training pay. I know that a lot of times, agencies that employ youth peer advocates for like the CFTSS program, they will also have it in the budget to have training hours. Okay, so that's professional development. Maybe up to the agency's discretion, maybe that's something that you put toward that. And it will help, involve the youth voice as well. So a few notes on accessibility when it comes to reaching out to youth peer advocates, providing materials in multiple languages based on the communities you are recruiting from. If you are recruiting from New York City, you probably have to put materials in a lot of different languages, because that's the community there has a lot of different diversity, a lot of different languages that people speak as first languages, or maybe just second languages they speak very often, and family at home, that's English is not their first language. If you're in more rural out there, you might only have 2 languages or 3 languages that you have to concern yourself with. But just making sure that you're being aware of the communities around you that you're recruiting from. Using plain language and avoiding jargon. Youth peer advocates are very diverse, in what different types of skills that they have. You might have a youth peer advocate like myself that has a master's degree, and you might have a youth peer advocate that has only worked one job and they never finished high school. we still all have the youth experience. We're still qualified to be youth peer advocates. There's no difference in that qualification, but there might be a difference in, reading level or understanding of language, especially a lot of clinical language, that differs from youth peer advocate to youth peer advocate. So just making sure that we're inclusive in that sense. Culturally relevant examples and imagery to reflect the diverse youth backgrounds, and then ensuring materials are mobile friendly, since many young people access information through smartphones, right? So the QR code is a big part of that as well. Making sure that your website has a mobile friendly version, because usually they come with a desktop and a mobile friendly. So you might want to reach out to your communications department if you feel like there might be an issue with that. Okay. So we are going to get into the screening piece of this. So now we've got some youth peer advocates that are ready to go. You've called a few of them. They say they're interested. Now what? Now we're going to get to the screening piece. So this is a really, really important thing to note. If you take nothing else away, this is pretty big. Labor laws require that employers cannot ask about age or lived experience during an interview. So that's integral to the credential. That's integral to somebody being eligible or qualified for the credential. So how do we get around it? It's important to know if your candidate is qualified for the Youth Peer Advocate credential, which is necessary for Medicaid reimbursement of youth peer support services, right? So when we're looking at these applications for credentials, you probably want to avoid these applications that are coming in. Like I said, we've had a few here and there, but these applications that come in where the person just they weren't eligible, and you've gone through the hiring process and they didn't end up being eligible. So you can ask if they fit the official Families Together New York State qualifications description on the website, and then ask them to expand on that as they see comfortable, right? So we have that description, and I will, put the link in the chat for our website, and that will be what you can use to kind of say, if you haven't looked already, on the Families Together website, they have the description for a youth peer advocate credential. That's what we require for you to have this position. If you could take a moment, take a look at that if you haven't already, and do you fit that description for that credential, right? And so I'm going to place that in the chat real quick. Okay. Yeah. So that is the overview for our youth peer advocate credential. All right. This is the definition of lived experience, right? And I had mentioned that a little bit earlier. Lived experience relates to personal experience navigating one or more of the youth serving systems, such as mental health, foster care, juvenile justice, special education, or other related systems before the age of 18, right? I've had people tell me, oh, I went to a psychiatric hospital, or, an inpatient facility, and I was 19. So you didn't have the youth experience piece of it necessarily. They might be a great candidate for a New York Certified Peer Specialist, but not a candidate for this particular credential. And youth peer advocates must also be between the ages of 18 and 30 to hold a credential. Credentials for youth peer advocates expire on their 31st birthday. There had been, there's a lot of times we get emails asking for the clarification of that, and it makes sense because of sort of that odd cutoff piece. But yes, on the 31st birthday, the credential does expire. Okay. So a few things to keep in mind when you are interviewing a youth peer advocate, right? You completed the screening, they're definitely interested, you scheduled them for an interview. These are some questions for yourself. Before you write those interview questions and you have that interview, are you flexible? And is your interview accessible? Are you accounting for unique peer needs? What is the setting of the interview? Are you approachable? Are you maybe overly formal and clinical? I know that earlier I had said, making sure that we're keeping the jargon and clinical language to a minimum. And are you setting any professional biases aside, right? This is a big one. Are, their excessive tattoos are very unprofessional. They're using too much slang. It's not a clinical position. It's a sort of, adjacent type of position, you don't need to know those big things. You don't need to have a certain, appearance comparatively. Of course, there is, what your individual agencies have as, dress code policy and things like that. But generally, just keeping in mind, the youth peer advocate kind of perspective of what professionalism means, and does it match with your perspective? Um, so thinking just of some, examples, right? A youth peer advocate might have certain obligations in their life. Maybe they have family obligations. Youth peer advocates that might have had involvement in the foster care system, for example. They might have custody of a sibling, of a younger sibling. That's pretty, common. So are you making sure that you're flexible around that, like, responsibility, or their own kids, right? Like responsibilities that they have to their family. A youth that has mental health lived experience, maybe they have continuous treatment and care that they have to be mindful of. Are you being mindful of that too, of how that might work out to their scheduling, right? That's just a few examples. There's many, many examples, because as I had said, youth peer advocates really range in their experiences, but just keeping those things in mind as you go along. And then some sample interview questions, that are flexible and don't, that aren't too personal or invasive. I have a few sample interview questions here. Can you tell me some ways that you might use your personal lived experience to support the people that you would be working with, right? So really getting away from what is your lived experience, and more like, how are you going to use that? What were the takeaways you had? And how is that going to support the youth that we work with here? What is your experience with the mental health system? There might be a lived experience answer, and there might be a professional experience example. There might be a family experience example that they might have. And what role has peer support had in your own journey? There are quite a bit of youth peer advocates who had a youth peer advocate, especially when they're on the younger side. And this formal program has kind of been in fruition for several years, right? Some might have had informal, peer support. Some might have had a parent who had a family peer advocate. And can you give an example of your ability to advocate for others? Right, and that's sort of similar to that first question of just giving that example. What have they done in the past? Lived experience, professional answer, you might get either, or anything in between. Okay. All right. So you've done the interview. You love this one youth peer advocate. They stood out. They have glowing advocacy experience, and you want to hire them. So do you have, bringing that flexibility back, is there orientation flexibility? Do you have an orientation option that's after hours? Do you have a Saturday orientation option? Do you have an option to, honestly, to just do the orientation with them if the orientation that you are typically giving, if it doesn't work with their schedule? And we don't have an after hours option. We don't have a weekend option, but I will give you the equivalent. I'll set some time aside for you, and doing things like that. The path to the youth advocate provisional credential, which we will get to a little bit later. So making sure that you're familiar with it, the new hire that you have is familiar with it, knowing the internal trainings and Families Together New York State trainings that are available to the youth peer advocate as they start to get onboarded, they get trained before they start working with youth, knowing the resources that the youth can use, that the youth peer advocates can use, that you can use to help you along this process. This is one of those resources, right? This webinar in and of itself. Ensuring that other staff know the peer role and how it fits into their work. So let's say this is a totally brand new thing to you. This is the first youth peer advocate that you've ever hired. Make sure that people know before the youth peer advocate gets on the floor, gets into the field, gets in the car to meet the youth peer advocate, for the first time. Do the other staff know, what role that youth peer advocate will have? You don't want a care manager to, unknowingly, with good intention, call the youth peer advocate and say, this new youth on their case, this is all the situations that they have. These are the issues they have. This is, using that overly clinical language. And by the way, can you take them to school, on every Monday? Because that seems like the day that they're having most trouble going to school. No, that's not in the role, right? We're not regular transportation. And so just preventing that right off the bat, like, this is the youth peer advocate role. Please, now that we are integrating these youth peer advocates, take a look at this, so that we know what we are and aren't asking of the youth peer advocates. And then self-care planning. That is optional, of course. Youth peer advocates should always have the ability to, do so and not do so. But as you are supervising a youth peer advocate, things might come up where you have to be flexible, and knowing that self-care planning might give you an upper edge in, making sure there's retention and making sure that there's work wellness and that the youth peer advocate feels safe and supported in their role. Right. All right, so we are getting toward the resources piece of this. So here are a few resources that are going to help you in recruiting and retaining youth peer advocates. Families Together in New York State, it's good to have a good relationship with FTNYS, right? Because that's where we're credentialing the youth peer advocates both provisionally, professionally, and also doing the renewals where they need to do a certain amount of continued education. PeerTac is not a live thing anymore. There's not new content being created, unfortunately, and it's not clear whether or not that is permanent or temporary. We're hoping it's temporary, right? But the material is all still available. All the previous material, all the previous webinars, curated articles and toolkits, one of which I will, provide a little bit later, the link for it. But those are still available for you. So you can still take a look at the website, even though it's not like a live program anymore. CTAC is a live program, right? That's what this webinar is. It's through CTAC. So just going in, there's a learning management system. That's where the youth peer advocates will be taking some of their training. That's where you can take some training. It's where youth peer advocates can actually do their continuing education training. It's one of the many places, but that is where they can do some webinars and do some continuing education so that they can maintain their credential. So if you're thinking about a 19-year-old youth peer advocate who's like, I want to do this for as long as I can, right? Until I can't anymore and I have to get, I have to look into other options. This is my professional development. The renewal is every 2 years. So how many increments of 2 years, right? Think about that. How many increments of 2 years is that youth peer advocate has to be continuously doing continuing education? So making sure that you have that information on hand, right? New York Trauma Informed Network and Resource Center, that might be another place. Webinars and things like that, continuing education opportunities do arise every once in a while, and they do have some great resources as well. They have like a regular, I think it's called Body, Breath, Mind, or something similar, like a half hour, several options per day, per week, or whatever, to sort of do that mindfulness. So you might make that just part of their day. They might make that part of their day. They might make that part of their time that they're, at the agency doing their work. NAMI is also a very well-known one. I've been to quite a few, and I didn't include Mental Health America, but it's similar to NAMI where they have live webinars and they provide an email that says, this is your proof that you've attended. Thanks for attending. And that can be used as well with continuing education down the line, either informally or formally for their credential renewal. Friends of Recovery, Youth Voices Matter, again, another place that has those continuing education opportunities, resources, and then checking in with your OMH, OCFS, OPWDD, right? That's Office of Mental Health, Office of Children and Family Service, Office of People with Developmental Disabilities, I believe. So knowing the requirements there, that way that you can train the youth peer advocates appropriately to respond to their guidance. Okay, so the Youth Peer Advocate Hiring Toolkit. And I will put that link in the chat there for the toolkit. That is one of the resources that is on PeerTac. Again, it can be accessed despite the fact that it's not active anymore. Let me put that in the chat real quick. Okay. So it includes things like the youth career advocate role, skills and qualities of an effective youth career advocate, recruiting and hiring. So a lot more in-depth material than I'm giving you today. Setting expectations and screening, interviewing, training and credentialing, onboarding new youth career advocates, preparing your organization, communicating the youth career advocate role to other staff, and retention. So a lot of the things, more expansive resources and more expansive questions and resources on what we're talking about today. Okay. I'm going to go through this briefly. So there are 6 steps to getting the professional youth peer advocate credential. So step 1, completing that online training, which can be found at the learning management system for CTAC. I am going to put that link in the chat as well. And that is how they will be able to access the level 1 training. They'll get a certificate for the level 1 training. And from there, they can apply for the provisional credential. So that certificate, plus proof of age, proof of education, or, in the circumstance where they haven't graduated high school, they don't have a GED, there is an equivalency form of like work experience that they can use. The certificate, as I had said, and 2 letters of recommendation. It cannot be from a current supervisor, and it can't be a friend, and it can't be a treatment provider. But other than that, and that information is all, on our website and things like that. Putting all of that together, signing the code of ethics, giving a statement of their own lived experience, and that's the provisional credential. So that's when they can provide the services that are Medicaid reimbursable. Just having that provisional credential works for that. The provisional credential is valid for 18 months. And then after that, there would be, the processes that, extensions and everything like that. So it's best to start working with the youth care advocate on getting the professional credential, sooner rather than later, so that you don't risk that lapse in care. So then they'll complete, part of that is completing the level 2 online training. That is, again, in the learning management system, the LMS for CTAC, at that link that I had just put in the chat. And then there's a level 2 advanced training. We're now requiring that youth peer advocates have worked with youth for 3 months before they do that level 2 advanced training. That's a live training on Zoom. So that, and having the level 2 online training done. So that's certificate from the CTAC learning management system that we're supposed to have that before we do that like live training. And then followed by live training, right after that, there will be a set of coaching calls. That depends on how many youth peer advocates we have in the 4-day training. It could be like 4 weeks, it could be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever, it just depends. We usually have smaller cohorts, so it's not as long typically, but, and then once all of that is completed, plus 600 hours of working with youth, total 600 hours, as a youth peer advocate working with them, with their provisional credential, then they can apply for the professional credential, which is good for 2 years, and then every 2 years, you apply for the renewal, you have the continuing education, and you keep it going. And I'm putting another link in the chat as well. I realize I probably should have put descriptions for each of these. So if, Mimi, I don't know if you'd be able to do that for me real quick. Just take these and kind of organize them into what's what so that, people can leave with that. I really appreciate it. Put that last one in. Yeah, so that last one right there, the one that says GDT systems, that is the portal where youth peer advocates can submit their applications for their provisional, for their professional, and their renewal. You'll see that on the left. That's a screenshot from the GDT systems. So that's where they will upload everything. Okay. Continuous growth, development, and retention. monthly technical assistance calls, the TA calls. Mimi is actually going to be the one that does that now. That was me previously. So, if you look back into those previous TA calls, you might see me. But Mimi will be taking that over, and that also is a continuing education opportunity for the renewals. Youth peer meetings and youth power. So that's outside of the training and workforce development department. That's in the youth power department of Families Together. And it's a little bit more informal. It's not a continuing education opportunity, but it is an opportunity for youth peer advocates to connect and talk about the unique challenges that they face on the job and off the job, and advocacy in general, maybe on a larger scale. Youth peer advocate supervisor cafe. So that is an affinity space for supervisors only, of active supervisors that are currently supervising youth peer advocates, to come together and to discuss the unique challenges of supervising youth peer advocates. And we have a family peer advocate version of that as well. We are adding a youth peer advocate lived experience cafe, so Mimi's going to take that over as well. So that, and actually it's a new thing. So Mimi's actually starting right from the get-go with the lived experience cafe. We've had one with the family peer advocates for a while. We're doing a youth peer advocate one now. So again, very similar. It's an affinity space for youth peer advocates, but it's facilitated by the training and workforce development department. So it might be a little bit more formal. But that also does not at this time count as a continuing education credit. The SUNY Empire Partnership. So this is another sort of selling point for recruitment. As a family peer advocate or youth peer advocate, you get a certain amount of credits through SUNY Empire, and I'm an alum of SUNY Empire, so maybe I'm a little biased here, but it's a great program, and it's a very flexible program. And so if you have youth peer advocates that are looking to build themselves up to like an associate's degree or a bachelor's degree, and they're not sure where to look, they're not sure, what's a flexible, affordable option, they have one through a public university that is entirely online. We have Streamline that goes both ways. It's a youth peer advocate to New York certified peer specialist, and New York certified peer specialist to youth peer advocate. So if you as I had mentioned, we're making connections with certified peer specialists that you have in your agency already, and they are 24 and they have lived experience in residential mental health when they were 50. I don't know. I'm just, this is an example, right? You can have them become a youth peer advocate so much faster because they don't have to take that level 1 training the online. They can just use the certificate that they have for their NYCPS and they can get the provisional immediately. The other requirements are still required, everything after that, but the provisional credential you can get very quickly. And then similarly, if you're looking at a youth peer advocate that's maybe on the older end, they're 28, 29, 30, what am I going to do after this? Part of their youth peer advocate training, their youth peer advocate training works toward training for the New York Certified Peer Specialist Program. So they can have that career growth, through you very quickly. The Youth Peer Advocate Credential Committee, which I believe we changed the name of it recently, so the acronym might not be correct, but it is council. Yes, it's a council now, but it's a stipend. It's a stipend-based program, so youth peer advocates can apply for it. They get, I believe it's a $50 or $100 per month per session that they sit in on, and just being a part of promoting the credentialing process. Should we change things about the credentialing process? Should we add things? If there's a code of ethics violation, they review that code of ethics violation, and just being able to develop and preserve the fidelity of the credential. And so there's other things to come. There's other things in the works, and those all factor in. All right, so I'm going to, it says what more do you want to know, but I'm going to turn it over to the CTAC end of this, and we will start our Q&A. Thank you so much, Mimi, for your help and support through it.
Absolutely. So I did go ahead and put those links in the chat for everyone so that they are available, with just a little bit of a clip as to what you might get when you click on that link. I'm also going to go ahead and share a PDF as well. That's just for the YPA training outline that Jay was just walking you through. It's a little bit more detailed for the PDF, just if you want to take a look. And then we will go ahead with some questions. So thank you so much for that presentation, Jay. The one question that I have was from Yvonne, who asked about the training being pretty extensive with a total of 74 lessons. Is there compensation provided? If so, at what rate?
The youth peer advocate training is free at this point. It's subsidized by Office of Mental Health. So you shouldn't have to pay anything for the credentialing, if that's the training that you were referring to.
Yes. So with that training, not only do you not have to pay for it, but we, as an organization for CTAC or for FTNYS, we don't pay out for anyone taking that training. There's nothing that allows them to get paid. If they already hired through your organization and you've onboarded them prior to them receiving it, then it would be up to your discretion if you wanted to pay them for going through that training. But they would still need to go through the application process with FTNYS to actually receive the credential. But unfortunately, at this point, there's no payment for going through that training. No problem. Are there any other questions? That's the one question that I have in the chat, but you can feel free to come off of mute and ask your questions or to put them in the chat. Alrighty, I don't see any other questions coming in. So I just want to say once again, thank you so much, Jay, for your great presentation, and thank you everyone for your time and attention. As a reminder, today's recording and slides will be available on the CTAG website within the next 2 to 3 business days. Our coordinator will be sending a link in the chat box so you can complete a brief feedback survey, which you will also receive in an email in case you're unable to complete it at this time. And then on behalf of FTNYS, CTAC, and Jay, I just want to thank you all for being here. We also have the upcoming CTAC events. So on Tuesday, July 15th from 12 to 1 p.m., there will be another CTAC event on the serious emotional disturbance, the review of determination and documentation. So please feel free to join us for that as well. And if there's nothing else, I just want to thank you guys once again for joining us and have a great rest of your day.